All right. So back in 2014, we had the Bostrom book, Superintelligence, and I read that 7 years ago in 2019, and it's still really the only book that is any good on the topic of AI safety. There's been like no progress. Um, all of the books that have come out after it are either derivative or just total junk. There have been studies on AI safety, but anyway, so I'm just gonna talk about kind of what was going on in those early days. You know, when there was when OpenAI was an AI safety, well, I guess it was a company at the time, um, and when there was more public participation, and they were more kind of open about what they were doing. You could just read the Less Wrong blog before it became kind of junk and forgotten about. But anyway, so the thing about Bostrom's book, uh, AI has been redefined. So back then, AI meant that thing which would be general AGI, right? And it wasn't known what it would be. So uh, the kind of AI that we got, that we now call AI, was just one part of the book, and there were a bunch of other hypothetical cases that have not occurred. So according to his model, what we have is neuromorphic AI, and it's an oracle, right? So it was made to somehow resemble a brain, although of course it doesn't really resemble a brain that much. Uh, and you ask it a question, it gives you an answer. But there's other methods that we could have gotten, like symbolic, so like a knowledge base style. And there were some companies that tried to do this back then. So it's like if you think of like a graph with like nodes and lines between them, that's basically the kind of way that those work. Um, and the nice thing about those is you can see how you got the solution, right? You can look at the graph. You can say like print the graph, or draw me the trace as you like went through, if there if it has arrows. Um, so it's transparent, right? So all right, there's your summary. Anyway, my kind of hypothesis is I'll get into my, I guess, conspiracy idea about this, or I don't know if they're conspiracies, but um, anyway, basically, what I think is what we have is is not going to come out as AGI, and so AGI is still a risk, but the stuff that we call AI now is not actually something that appears to be able to grow into a major risk because it's not creative. Uh, so it's not able to solve new problems. It's just really fast at kind of generating solutions that it's already has some training data on. So if you think about back then, we also had there was the big event with beating Lee Sedol at Go, which was you know a pretty interesting money grab that completely repeated the whole thing with Kasparov and chess. Um, so they had Alpha Go, which was trained on the Go boards, and then they had Alpha Zero, which was trained on the rules of Go, and it played itself, and it was way better, right? So the AI that we have, it's like AlphaGo, not AlphaZero, right? So we don't have any AI that's really built from the ground up, uh, that can creatively solve problems, um, in ways that humans would never be able to do, uh, or that doesn't even resemble. So, for example, if you take the like those top math problems with $1 million reward, I'm forgetting what it's called, and I think only one's been solved. Actually, that's not true. One of them was solved recently, though. It was the anyway. I can't remember the details much, but the point is, none of those have been solved by AI, right? No other major problems that were seen as maybe unsolvable have been solved by AI. AI has solved a lot of tedium. It solved Um, it's kind of better than Googling, so it solved some research things. But these are all kind of like at a low level, and the risks that come with this low level are also pretty low. And in Bostrom's book, they were completely dismissed, like in a sentence. So yeah, well, it's possible that AI will mess up our jobs, but really we're worried about the existential risks of the human race, so we're not really going to be caring about that, would be the idea in the book, right? So this conversation about how AI affects our political discourse or our jobs in Bostrom's book Superintelligence, those things are completely dismissed offhand. Uh, and I think it's actually a good sign that those are the things that everybody's worried about, uh, because basically we don't have AGI and it's not coming from what we've made. So this is really good news. Um, so I really encourage people to read his book, because it's kind of like, if you think about Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Work Week, which was written a while ago, and it was about like the new way that you could work online and stuff. And kind of any book in that area, I'm just like doing my coffee here. Anyway, any book in that area is just a derivative work of his book, right? So kind of the same thing with Bostrom's book. There's been studies where they've come up with new things, and they tried to make ChatGPT safer by literally just putting a kind of like filter on it, and to try to get it to have the same kind of political views that the people had. And I couldn't believe that they actually presented these seriously, as if it has to do with AI safety. Like it's nothing to do with the real AI safety, I'll call it, right? With the big problems of AI safety have nothing to do with something as mundane as having a chatbot tell you something a little bit nicer, or like not generating text that is maybe not very nice, and so back then OpenAI was kind of an interesting new player. They presented themselves as trying to get into AI, and they wanted to be the first ones to make it, because they felt like if anybody's going to make it, they want to be the first one, so it wouldn't be so bad. And this was actually a pretty good argument, except for the fact that they IPO'd and became publicly traded, so it was no longer them. So I guess maybe the people who made OpenAI needed to think a little bit harder about their choice to make it, to structure their company the way they did, because it led to a complete loss of control over what they were doing, which is the whole point. So anyway, so back then AI safety was a part of a group of ideas. It was called like effective altruism, was one of them. And there was also, geez, can I remember this stuff? This like 7 years ago. But basically, with EA, if you're worried about like existential risks, there's a whole class of them. There's nuclear risk. There's widespread disease kind of risk, asteroid impact. Like these are all risks, right? AI safety was kind of one of these risks. So anyway, so what I think happened here. Okay, so anyway, so OpenAI, I know they read Bostrom's book. I know they read all those AI studies. There weren't that many. There was so little funding. Bostrom's book is like the only thing around, but I never see it mentioned anywhere. It's almost like people completely forgot about this stuff. But I think it's just not in their interest to talk about it. And it could actually be a good thing. Back then, the idea of information hazards was kind of figured out. And one example of an information hazard that they showed was when Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins noticed that it was strange that terrorists never tried to rent a truck and drive it into a crowd, because it seems like a really easy way to do a terrorist attack. So they wrote that in their books, and guess what happened? Now it's happened over and over again. So at this point, the cat's out of the bag that this is a cheap and easy way to do an attack. So it's possible that they did read Bostrom's book and they had a plan. So I'm going to discuss a hypothetical conspiracy theory about this. So here's how this looks, right? Um, the people at OpenAI hypothetically had a private conversation where they said, okay, nobody cares about our risk, and it is a real risk, and we don't ever. Uh, we need funding to make sure this risk stays low. So just like the great disease outbreak that occurred at just about the same time, right? Actually, just after, right? AI came just a couple years after that whole ordeal, right? There were people that were worried about a widespread disease in the EA, and then when one came, that maybe wasn't so bad. It was an opportunity to kind of inoculate everybody against the idea that we're immune to this risk, right? So it was maybe overblown, but as a result, now this risk is actually being taken seriously. It's kind of like a small tsunami kind of washing away some stuff, and then you realize, oh wow, we have a real risk of tsunami, and then building a wall that's 10 times higher, right? So with AI, it seems like maybe they had this kind of idea, right? We're gonna make something using the technology we already have, and we're going to basically trick everybody into thinking that it's a really big risk. So, but it's actually not going to be a big risk. So it's not going to be able to have goals, solve major problems, but it's going to feel powerful, and it's going to have. So it's kind of like, consider this example or thought experiment problem, right? Let's say that we want to make a robo ant, and we want to use it to convince another ant that it is actually an ant. How hard would that be? Conceptually, it's not very hard. All you need to do is do the little like antenna handshake, right? So the ant walks up, and then it hits it, and then they do the antenna handshake, and then it decides that it's another ant, and it leaves it alone if it thinks it's part of the whatever, right? The same one. So, but technologically, it actually is a bit hard because you need really tiny metals and like very fine grains, like whatever, right? So it's a little bit challenging to figure out how to make one of these. Also, like, it needs to be able to move towards the other ant. So, it's kind of a bit, not something that we could have made 50 years ago, right? So, just like that ant that is getting tricked, I think you're getting tricked, right? It feels like a person, kind of, right? It feels like something a person might say with AI. But there's all kinds of tells, right? It's pretty easy to see that the AI does not have an actual conceptual understanding of like anything. It doesn't matter if we're talking about AIs that make images or videos or text. They make like ridiculous conceptual mistakes that show that they do not understand what's going on, right? But they generate something based on their training data that's kind of close. So there's two mutually exclusive results that you can get from these systems, right? Either you have a system that it solves major problems in a good way, but it can also solve major problems in a bad way, right? Because we haven't solved alignment, right? So if it's creative and can solve huge problems that humans can't solve, that's great news. But also it can then do that for problems that we don't want solved, which is very bad news. Or we have an AI that can't do either of those, right? But we haven't solved AI safety, so there's no way to like get the correct mix, right? We want an AI that's not very good at solving bad problems and it's really good at solving good problems. But what we actually are is an AI that's not good at solving problems that would be good to solve or problems that would be bad to solve. So that's why I say it's not AGI. It's an interesting tool. It's narrow AI, and it doesn't seem to have any recourse to becoming AGI. I mentioned the Alpha Zero example, right? I don't think it's possible to make ChatGPT 0 because it would have to start from first principles, but you know, but it can't because it's too complicated. The world is more complicated than Go. In Go, you can literally list all the rules and that's it. But in the world, you can't do that. So it's just not going to happen unless you tried to simulate the universe, right? Which is, so I mean, you can kind of see AGI is possible to make, but what we have doesn't really resemble it much. And the conspiracy theory is that was done on purpose to basically make the people in OpenAI very rich and powerful, so that they could actually focus on the problem that they made their company for, which is to work on AI safety, right? And now everybody talks about AI safety, and it's actually been completely watered down. What is AI has been redefined. The questions around safety have been completely made very tame, and they don't really target the big issues we're talking about anymore. So questions like, how do we stop the AI from killing everyone? That's just like the beginning, right? How do we stop AI from loading you into a computer and torturing you? How do we stop AI from taping your face into a smile for eternity? How do we stop AI from giving people a solution to a problem that it was asked for, like how do I make a nuclear weapon, or something else, right? How do I make a black hole? These kinds of questions you don't want the answer to. And also, because AI has now gained this new narrow definition, the other types of AI that we could actually think about making have been completely forgotten, right? It's like, why do we talk about symbolic AI now? In an AI safety context. It's like, well, because that's where the risk would come from. So in Bostrom's book, there actually is a precedent for this kind of AI being a general risk. So the example was an oracle that has no goals. So that's basically what we ended up with, right? We have an oracle, and it doesn't actually have goals. And the problem we have with an oracle with no goals is that it answers your question. It's like a genie in a bottle. And we've resolved this problem by the thing was never that good at answering the question in the first place, so it's not really a genie in the bottle. And yeah, I mean, they pretended to, it's safer now because it won't tell you how to do, some, I mean, it fails all kinds of prompts, right? It fails all kinds of prompts, so now it's safe. It's like, well, even if it didn't, even if you get an obliterated model, it's still not very good at solving problems. So any healthy, sane person is not going to, be driven to suicide. Well, Jesus, I hate how much I have to censor myself on this freaking platform, but they're not gonna be driven to bleep themselves if by some words on the screen. It's just not gonna happen. Whereas with AGI safety, there's a risk, for example, that the AI is actually really smart and it can manipulate people's psychology to get them to do what it wants, right? Which could mean to die. Or worse, right? To, mass murder, that kind of thing. So, look at my notes. Yeah, so anyway, I guess I would be on the lookout for any kind of attempt to make this AI way more creative and way more able to solve a variety of problems in ways that are unique and not based on its training data alone. So anything that's based on like a self-driving car, it just looks at lots of car data and then predicts the roadway. It's not going to be so creative that it has the idea to drive really fast through a stop sign. with perfect timing, because it can't be that creative. It's not in the training data, and it's not going to be so creative that it if it sees a squirrel, it tries to like weasel it in between the wheels so it doesn't get hit, because it's not in the training data. I mean, actually, that might be because people do that, don't they? But things that are not in the training data. I'm trying to think of something actually like very unique, right? It's not gonna happen that way. Um, it's not gonna go into some crazy skid to park your car, like sideways, like a race car driver. It's not gonna do that because nobody ever does that in its training data. But if something like that is made, then I would be very concerned with the kind of way that AI has turned out with the Oracle solution. A creative oracle is bad news because we don't know how to make it aligned, and a filter doesn't work, right? Because we don't know how to make a general filter that is correctly aligned to human ideals, right? I mean, if anything, different humans have different ideals, so it would be a bad outcome even if it was really good because it would be too narrow for a certain kind of person's views, which already is a problem, right? But the problems we have are just way lower tier than these other ones, and that's really good news. So yeah, I mean, AI might take your job. It might totally strip the economy. Uh, I mean, it might make you kind of dumb because you don't do anything creative or smart. But it's probably not going to kill you um, directly. It's not going to hunt you down. Uh, it doesn't know how to achieve goals. It doesn't know to move you out of the way as an instrumental goal. It doesn't know how to tell you to do something very dangerous that people don't already know how to do in public on the internet. So it's actually, yeah, it's pretty good news. So, enjoy your AI. Don't pay too much for it because it's not that useful. I mean, it's pretty useful, but it's not going to make you a god. So it's just like any other tool. It turned out, but you know, be be ready though in case something serious happens, right? So back in that time, the people that were concerned about the safety of disease, they were talking about. It was pretty obvious that the top tier risk of disease would be something like a highly transmissible avian flu, right? So the avian flu, in that case, would they're very deadly. It's like 90% death rate when somebody gets it direct from the bird to human, because the bird has a high body temperature, and then you get a fever, and it doesn't kill the virus, and then you get a really high fever, which is very deadly. So weirdly, that big virus that happened came from a bat, allegedly. So bats have really high body temperature. It's almost like this story was crafted by the EA guys in order to give us a big warning about this kind of risk, so we could figure out what to do in the case of something very bad happening, which isn't what happened then, right? But it wasn't supposed to be. This opportunity arrived, or maybe it was created, and then it was exaggerated, and now we're going to be on the lookout for that risk for a while. Actually, in asteroids, they've also made progress, right? They blasted that freaking probe into the asteroid, and then they figured out that by blowing it up, because there's a kinetic impact, it actually does push stuff a little bit that way. And then from gravity, all those particles that have been pushed somewhat that way, they recongeal, but with momentum. So they're actually able to move a rubbly asteroid, which was interesting. So now we have some precedent for like what to do with an asteroid. So actually a ton of progress. Like the EA guys, I don't know if they were actually a part of this or what. But at the time they knew about maybe keeping your mouth shut about certain things. So the idea that they may have been involved in a conspiracy is actually not crazy, because they said it themselves that they would be interested in that. But anyway, lots of progress has been made in existential safety since then. In nuclear, it has not happened. I've heard some things that sound pretty good. I heard about the military doing war games where they experimented with introducing nuclear weapons into the war game, and what they've realized, thankfully, is that if you introduce nuclear weapons at any point, eventually they just get completely used. So if you just like use a nuclear weapon to hit a military establishment, it kind of opens Pandora's box and creates a new norm that it's okay to use nuclear weapons, and then eventually everybody uses them because it's a competition, right? It's a race to the bottom. So yeah, I mean, it turns out MAD was actually pretty close to what needed to happen. So yeah, I mean, you can see there's a whole like realm of these, but they all kind of have the same structure when it comes to getting funding to resolve them, inoculating people in the problem, maybe getting a smaller scare, like two nuclear powers having a war with each other, or even a proxy war, I guess, where people are maybe concerned that they might be used, and then having to make more decisions, or a new nuclear power coming into existence, and making people kind of more apt to prevent this, and so on, right? But anyway, it's kind of the same structure with all these. So, if anything, it's possible that we have completely dodged this risk because we basically won't be making actual AGI, because we've completely redefined what AI is now, and we're not thinking about it's not even possible to talk about AGI now because AI is this particular thing that we made, and that's AI. So how am I supposed to talk about, actual AI, super intelligent AI, which is what the book is about, Superintelligence by Bostrom. When the conversation has been completely shifted. It's been totally watered down too. Like once it became public, there became just a few kind of talking points and questions, and kind of canned answers, and maybe like a couple different views. Whereas in Bostrom's book, there's such a wide array of ways to think about what could happen. So we got a competitive. I forgot to mention that earlier. So it's a competitive, neuromorphic oracle that we got. But something that he didn't predict is that it's trained on data from human behavior, and anything that's outside of that data set, it reacts very poorly. Like it actually works way worse than a human when presented with surprising information. Because it just has absolutely no way to make a correct decision there. So this is why, I have a little AI that you can use it in an image to like erase stuff, and then try to cover it. But it has no training on writing, or at least not much. So if you try to erase some words, and then you try to tell it to put a new word there, it just goes all crazy. It just puts squiggles, right? It has no idea. It just puts squiggles there, like just totally random squiggles. So that's kind of what we're dealing with, right? It's like, hey, solve this unique problem. It would be great if we had this kind of AI that could do this, right? Just give it any junky image and be like, just kind of figure out what the words are and make it look like the words are all there correctly, and it's like high fidelity now. It doesn't do it because it doesn't have it doesn't have the training, and it can't figure it out. A human could do it. A human can read it, even if it's really hard to read. They can kind of deduce what the words were and stuff, and then they can type it out, and then they can kind of fudge it in Photoshop to look a bit like the original page. They can get an image that looks just like the original page, but is actually made out of text, right? Because text is digital. It's not actually an image, right? Conceptually, it's like letters and words, which can be typed digitally. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the positive view of AI. Something that wasn't presented in Bostrom's book because the kind of stage we're in was just dismissed immediately. It was maybe talked about for one page or something, and then kind of blown off as not relevant because it's not what the book's about. So yeah, we don't have, according to the book, that kind of thing yet. So that's very good news.